Yeah. Yes. My name is Amy Ellis. I'm the founder of She the People. She the People is a national network to elevate the voice and political power of we women of color. I founded She the People to uphold 4 fundamental values. First, to love our own and each other. To seek justice for all. To ensure that everyone belongs. And finally, to make sure that this American democracy lives up to its greatest promise. We are making history here in Houston today. This is the first ever presidential forum focused on women of color. I want to thank you all for coming in on planes and buses and in your car from all across the country, 28 states in all. I want to thank our amazing, beautiful women of color, our partners here in Texas. We are a powerful room. 42 years later, we returned to Houston, Texas, where the term women of color was born at the National Women's Convention in 1977. But I want to tell you something. Our lineage runs further back than that. It goes back to Harriet Tubman, to Sojourner Truth, to Ida B. Wells, to Ella Baker. It goes back to Grace Lee Boggs and Yuri Kochiyama. It goes back to Zik Khalasa and Queen Liliuokalani. She the People found voice in the Cherokee Chief Wilma Mankiller and organizer Luisa Moreno. And it was exemplified by Houston's own, the great Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, in whose honor we do this today, who taught right here at the great Texas Southern University. And She the People resounds with our hero Shirley Chisholm, who began her historic run for Congress some 51 years ago today. These are our godmothers. We walk in their footsteps to this moment. With this forum, we women of color, Black, Indigenous, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Latinx, and Muslim. We're kicking off the presidential season. Today we meet 8 presidential candidates vying for our votes in a nomination process for the Democratic Party. Our hope is to advance a national conversation to help voters distinguish which candidates stand with and for women of color in our communities. And let me tell you something, the candidate that does that best and most consistently will win the nomination and the White House in 2020. She the People is about a politics we have not yet seen. We want a country where people can live with dignity. We want to insist that whoever receives our vote and our support will govern with our deepest values and full humanity in view. Remember, we're a powerful voting bloc. 1 of 5 voters in primaries are women of color, and we are 25% of the voters in key swing states of Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Arizona. But in case people think electability starts in the South, let me remind the country we're also the strongest Democratic Party voters in Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and California. The stakes could not be higher. From the highest office in the land, we have come under consistent and active efforts to dissemble the laws that protect our basic civil and human rights, relentless attacks against Muslims, immigrants, black women, asylum seekers, the poor, students, and our transgender service members. In all our communities, we have been deeply affected and harmed by the cruel policies and practices of this country, especially in the last 2 years. But listen, we're not going back to 2016 or any other year. We're taking the country forward. I believe women of color are the saving graces of our democracy. We are holding up moral standards for the rest of the nation, and we do this not just for women of color. We do this for all of America. So please, I want you to tweet and post early and often with hashtag #SheThePeople. Because trust, we're going to have a brilliant and stunning conversation online with the country's strongest and most intelligent and most brilliant progressives, and that's you. So we need to hear from you. So if we're ready to get going, take a deep breath, shoulders back, hearts open. We're together in this. And with that, let's get started by asking Joanne Reed of MSNBC to come on stage, our co-moderator.
Hello. Wow. Hey, Houston. You know, when I'm in this city, I'm tempted to say, okay, ladies, now let's get information. Right? For She the People. Well, welcome. This is going to be great.
It's going to be fantastic. We're so excited.
Let's get started.
All right.
Let's do it.
And let's welcome out to the stage our very first candidate, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure. How's it feel?
Alphabetical order has always got me since I was a kid in grade school.
I want to start by talking about something that, first of all, I should say all the questions that we have are from committed and brilliant activists in the audience. And one of them that I think is very important is a UN report showed that we have 12 years to dramatically reduce emissions before we reach irrevocable ecological catastrophe. In California, we saw paradise burn to the ground. We've seen superstorms and hurricanes right here and flooding right here in Houston. From the lack of infrastructure protecting sea rise levels to increased proximity in our communities to polluting facilities and busy roads, people of color are more likely to get asthma, pollution-related diseases, etc. As president, how will you address both pollution and poverty?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the question. It's very good to be here before this incredible audience of powerful Americans who will determine who the next nominee is from our party and who the next president is in the United States of America. I have come from a black and brown community. I've spent more years as a mayor of Newark, New Jersey than I have in the United States Senate. And when it comes to environmental issues, climate change, we have 12 years. But the reality is if you live in a community like mine, the environmental urgencies, the life or death issues are happening right now. And so whether it's toxic water, where we have a nation where millions of our children find it easier to find unleaded gasoline than unleaded water, whether it's asthma rates in communities like mine that are multiple times higher than suburbs and wealthy communities, or even if it's just knowing that in communities like ours, even planting in your soil, the EPA prevented us from doing. And so we have an urgency right now to deal with these issues. It's not something that I focused on just as a presidential candidate. We've been fighting these battles for environmental justice since I was a mayor. And there is common pain, because whether it's the low-lying areas of North Carolina where these massive corporate CAFOs and pig farms are polluting areas, or the mountains of Alabama where you have Uniontown and Tallahassee where they have toxic dumps placed there, all of these things demand urgency. As United States Senator, I led the bill for environmental justice, bringing together activists from all around the country to put in teeth so that environmental activists have the power to change their communities, to control their own destiny. And as President of the United States, I will make sure that we do what's necessary for environmental justice, access to clean air, to clean water, and to deal with the urgencies of climate change by making sure we rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, re-up our commitments to clean energy standards, and make sure that we are dealing aggressively with a bold green future. And finally, let me just say that with climate change, we have 10 years to deal with it, but vulnerable communities are going to feel the impacts first. And so this cannot be something where we don't act with a sense of urgency. And we've got to be creative in the way we're going about it, both here by making sure we're investing in green technologies, giving those kind of tax breaks we've given to oil companies and coal companies now to green companies and renewable energy companies. And we have to lead in the globe, because we just produce 14% of the problem. Unless we're starting to get involved in developing nations and give them the assistance and support to make sure that they are dealing with climate change too, we will not be successful.
Just a quick follow-up to you, Senator. We know that climate change also drives migration. You talked about reaching out and helping not just struggling communities in the United States, but struggling communities outside the United States where migration might be driven because of changes in the climate. We just saw the current president use a national emergency, declare a national emergency on the issue of immigration in the southern border. Would you, as president, use national emergency powers regarding climate change? Is it that serious of a threat that you would use national emergency powers?
So national emergency is a legal issue, as well as sort of triggering certain actions. I'm talking about it is a national emergency now, that we have to act with that sense of urgency. And if you look at the United States military reports, they are showing exactly what you're saying. The climate crisis is going to cause refugee crises, famines. It's going to cause instability on the planet Earth like nothing we have seen before within the next decade to 2 decades. So we need to make sure that we are dealing with it with that same sense of urgency and start to use the levers that we have from our aid to make sure we're empowering people to move from coal to renewable energies, and to making sure that we're dealing with stability in countries, doing the kind of things that don't destabilize nations, but empower nations to have self-determination and deal with their own issues.
So through the normal process, not through a national emergency?
Again, through the normal process, yes.
I think we have some wonderful audience members that are going to ask some questions. So let's have Mabry come up. There we are. Hello, Mabry.
How you doing?
Good. I'm not sure. Oh.
Hi,
Where am I looking?
Booker. I'm right here.
Okay. Oh, right here.
And you're
Mabry.
Awesome.
What question do you have?
So my name is Maria Teresa Mabry. I'm with Mi Gente, and I'm also a fellow with the Electoral Justice Project with the Movement for Black Lives. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, in your view, is taxing the wealthy and corporations a racial justice issue? And if so, what is your commitment to fighting for both racial justice and economic justice?
Thank you very much. So, absolutely. The way what we've been doing right now is taking our national treasure on this theory that somehow is going to help all the people by giving trillions of dollars of tax breaks to the wealthiest in our country and the wealthiest in corporations, who ultimately, if you've seen recently, the recent tax record, some of our biggest corporations are paying effectively zero in taxes. This is absolutely a racial justice issue and an economic justice issue, where you have Americans now looking at a nation where corporate profits are at an 85-year high and wages are at a 60-year low. I live, the only person in the United States Senate, I live in a black and brown inner city community that economically is below the poverty line. And I watch my neighbors who work full-time jobs catch extra shifts where they can, and when they go to my local bodega, they still have to use food stamps to meet the minimum basic needs of a family. That is unacceptable, that is injustice, and because it disproportionately affects African American, Latinos, and minorities, it is a racial injustice issue as well. And so we have to fix that by making our tax code reflect our values. And that's why no more bank shots, this idea that if we send it up, somehow it's going to come down. We're going to now make sure, if I'm president, that we have a tax code directly focused on working people. That's why I've supported the RISE Act, which takes the earned income tax credit and blows it up to almost twice the size. My RISE credit would get families about $8,000 back. It would lift 150 million working American salaries. It would take about poverty rates and cut them by 1/3 in our nation. And even more that, it would change the definition of work. Because there are so many people who have to stay home and take care of a spouse with dementia or a special needs child. That is work too, and they should qualify for a credit.
Yeah.
All right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
for asking the question. We have another question in the back from another audience member. Come on down.
All right.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, Senator Booker.
Hello.
My name is Charisma Darden. I am a student at the illustrious and notable Texas Southern University. My question is about Ilhan Omar. She was recently critical of the outsized influence of AIPAC in determining U.S. foreign policy, including funding of Israel. Subsequently, she has received condemnation from the president and members of her own party, as well as death threats. What will you do as president to protect the right of courageous women of color to criticize U.S. policy, even when directed at allies?
Charisma, thank you for your question. The criticisms of Congresswoman Omar, what Donald Trump has been saying about her, is reprehensible. It is trafficking in Islamophobia, and it should be condemned by everyone. This kind of selective condemnation should be a chorus of people condemning it. And more than this, the kind of language our president uses, especially about black women in power, the kind of language this president uses, it is toxic. It fuels the kind of hate we see in our communities manifesting itself in the kind of terrorism that has been most seen in our nation since 9/11. Most of the terrorist attacks in our nation since 9/11 have been right-wing extremist attacks. The majority of those have been white supremacist attacks. And so when you have a president uttering such bigotry and uttering such racist attacks, talking about nations where black and brown people have come from in this nation as shithole countries, that is giving license to hate and to violence that we should not be tolerating. And so it's not just important to be an ally. As one of our great black women has said in the past, it's not enough just to say, I'm not a racist. We must, where racism exists, all be anti-racist. Because if we are not dealing with this issue in our country, we will continue to see these kind of attacks, and we will continue to see the kind of vicious violence that has been affecting our nation, from black churches to synagogues to Muslim mosques as well.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you
for the question.
Thank you.
So, Senator, the good folks at She the People are asking a fundamental question to each of the, as of Thursday, 20 of you, for now, who are running for president on the Democratic side, 20 and counting. And I guess the question would be fundamentally for women of color, with all of those options and choices, why should women of color choose you?
That's a great question. Well, you know, as a man that was raised by a strong black woman, who understood and taught me from my very earliest of ages the debt that I owe. From Mamie Till to Fannie Lou Hamer, from Barbara Jordan, all the way to people who led us in the abolitionist movement. We in America owe a debt to the championship and the leadership and the activism of women of color. And so I began my career, as I've said, in a black and brown community. The first person to tell me to run for office was the tenant president of some projects called Brick Towers, who wanted me in the fight and to remember where I came from. That's why I still live in that same neighborhood today. And so I'm a big believer that you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And as Brother Dr. West says, what does love look like in public? It looks like justice. And so women of color can trust me as someone for my entire career has been rooted in the communities that have empowered me to be who I am today. And all of my fights, even in the United States Senate, when I got there, there was not diversity. I fought with Brian Schatz to make sure that Chuck Schumer changed the rules to start showing our diversity statistics for Democratic senators that have moved to get a lot more diversity there. From taking on issues that are loyal to my communities that aren't talked about enough. Like, why does sickle cell research get so much less funding than other illnesses and diseases that affect less people? Why can we be a nation that has maternal mortality rates, maternal mortality for black women 3-4 times higher than white women? And so my fights have been fights that have shown who I am and shown my loyalty. And when I am president of the United States, these are going to continue to be the kind of fights that I take on. And I will make sure that this nation is finally who we say we are, a nation of liberty and justice for all.
Would you pledge to have a woman running mate?
The question, if you didn't hear it, is, will I pledge to have a woman running mate? I will have a woman running mate. To me, it's really clear that we do that.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. And finally, in your first 100 days, how will women of color know that you're a president for us and our communities?
You know, this is something that, to me, is so apparent when you look at leaders. Who they surround themselves with, who they put in positions of power, because inclusion is not an adornment. It's not something that just looks for the cameras and the TVs. We know from all the research, having inclusive teams around any leader is essential for having great teams that are effective and that get things done. And so in my first 100 days, you will see teams like I have had since I was the mayor of the city of Newark, since I got to the Senate and didn't just have diverse teams in my office, but made sure that we had more diverse teams in the Senate. To make sure that we are fighting for things like I am on my campaign, not just for diversity and inclusion, but hell, you can't campaign wrong and then think you're going to govern right. And so we talk about the issues that are legitimate and needed to be fought for in our community. And so by the team that I form and the actions that I take in my first 100 days, it will send a clear signal to my mom and to all the people in Newark, New Jersey who first put me in the game that I have not forgotten who I am, where I've come from, and the people that got me to where I am today. All right?
Senator Booker, thank you so much for joining us. The She the People, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll come here. We're going to cue the music. As we cue the music up for our next guest, everyone's got to have a walk-on song.
Look at that, there are people all the way up there.
Yeah, Secretary Castro! Welcome, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
How are you?
Thank you. Hey.
Hello.
I didn't know I had my own music.
Yeah.
My own music.
I was waiting for the walk-on music.
Yeah, they made you wait. Everybody wait to get the right walk-on music. Does everybody have their own
We were
walk-on
going to
music?
play the entire homecoming video, but it would have taken,
But it'd taken too long.
Wait, I will say though that the picture that y'all have in your program is actually of my brother, Joaquin. Yeah, you have my brother's picture. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Prove it.
Listen.
He would say that that's a good thing because he's better looking than I am, but you know.
All right. Well, you're home. You're in your home state of Texas.
That's right. Good to be here in Texas.
I'm gonna tell you or ask you. Our first question hits many people, not only here in Texas but across the country. It's about gentrification.
Yeah.
Gentrification has forced many of us further and further from our jobs, driving long distances, looking for affordable places to live. What would be your plan as president to address this a social justice issue, environmental issue that affects, above all, young people and working people?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you all very much for having me here today. It's great to be here in Texas. To everybody that isn't from Texas, bienvenidos a Texas. So I imagine that a lot of folks in this audience have grappled with this reality, which is that today we see throughout the country in many neighborhoods in the United States, especially in communities of color, and especially in low-income communities of color, a lot of people being displaced. And I can tell you that if I had to grade every single community that I saw when I was HUD Secretary, I was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, to give them a letter grade, and I visited 100 different communities, I would not give a single community an A for what they're doing when it comes to gentrification. Because usually what happens is that there's a neighborhood that hasn't been paid attention to, it's been underinvested in, the people have been largely ignored, and then it starts getting some improvements, and new people start moving in and fixing up some of the houses or the apartments, and then they start getting some, restaurants or grocery store or bars, and then all of a sudden there's this cycle that happens, and by the time there's a response, it's past a tipping point, and people are getting displaced. Austin is a great example here in Texas. In Austin, on the east side of Austin, over the last 15 years, they have lost about 50% of their African American population, right? So that's just one example. The question is, what would I do about that? I think we have to tackle this in many different ways that connects the dots. First of all, we need to make sure that there's a greater supply of affordable housing so that people can afford to live in their own neighborhood that they choose to live in. Secondly, we have to find ways to provide relief for the people that are there, the residents who are living there, so that they are not as impacted, for instance, as property taxes go up, as the cost of living in those neighborhoods go up. There have been a couple proposals, for instance, here in the Texas legislature on how you might provide property tax relief to help buffer low-income residents and prevent displacement. At the national level, I would encourage and invest in communities so that people could find affordable housing supply where they want to live, stay in these neighborhoods, and then be buffered against that kind of displacement. The other thing that we need to do, though, is enforce our Fair Housing Act. And when I was Secretary of HUD, we promulgated, or we passed the most groundbreaking rule called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which was unfinished business from the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and basically said to communities that got federal taxpayer money through HUD, you have to get more serious about equal housing opportunity in your jurisdiction. So, we promulgated that rule. The first plans from cities started to come in October, I think it was October 4th of 2016. And then when Dr. Carson and the Trump administration got in, they actually put that on ice. If I'm president, one of the first things that I'm doing is making sure that we bring back affirmatively furthering fair housing so that every community has to answer for equal housing opportunity. And I believe that that's going to help to address this issue of gentrification.
And Secretary Castro, if I could ask a quick follow-up. You came, obviously you were HUD Secretary under President Obama, who came in just at the height of the Great Recession, and came in, and that was his first task, was trying to reverse that damage. And a lot of that damage was to families of color, whose housing disappeared in the mortgage crisis. You saw predatory lenders attempted to be reined in by bills like Dodd-Frank. A lot of that has been rolled back under this administration. Do you think that some Wall Street bankers should have gone to prison over their conduct to help bring on the Great Recession? And B, what would you do to reinstate some of the protections against predatory lending that so impact communities of color?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What happened now about a decade, a little bit more than a decade ago, decimated black wealth especially, also wealth in the Latina community. And I do think that there were successes in the Obama administration. I do think that there are big, powerful forces that were taken on, but I agree with you, I agree with the spirit of the question, that I believe there should be more accountability for people on Wall Street for what happened. And if I'm president, I will make sure that no matter who you are, nobody is above the law in this country. And that includes people on Wall Street. For communities out there, the lesson that we can learn from the last decade is that our initiatives, our programs need to be focused on making sure that people can stay in their home, right? And that they can help recoup that wealth, because especially for Black families and Latino families, their house oftentimes is really their only source of wealth. Right? That's it. So what can we do? We can strengthen the FHA. The FHA used to be part of the problem. It used to sanction redlining, basically housing discrimination. Today, about 40% of first-time African-American home buyers get an FHA-insured mortgage. So it's a very powerful tool to help ensure that people have opportunity. We can make sure that we invest in things like community development block grants and home funding, and those things that help build up community. Those are the kinds of things that I'd like to see. And during the course of this campaign, I look forward to releasing my own housing proposal that will include what we're going to do in distressed communities to make sure that everybody can prosper, not just some people.
Great. All right. We have some questions.
We have 2 questions and not that much time, but I'm hoping we can have them both. Welcome.
Hi, Secretary Castro. I'm Destiny Lopez, co-director of the All Above All Action Fund. Since the passage of the Hyde Amendment in 1976, anti-abortion policymakers have added abortion funding bans to Medicaid, Medicare, the Children's Health Insurance Program, for federal employees and their dependents, Peace Corps volunteers, Native Americans, women in federal prisons and detention centers, military service women, veterans and their dependents, and low-income women in the District of Columbia. Bans on insurance coverage of abortion often create an insurmountable barrier to women of color already struggling to get affordable health care. How will you ensure that everyone can get insurance coverage for abortion in your first term as president?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Let me begin by saying that what I believe in is that everybody in this country should get health care, not just health insurance, right? That too often in our nation, health insurance is you getting a denial letter that tells you the 2 or 3 reasons why you can't actually get the procedure or the treatment that you need. Health care is actually getting that treatment. I also believe in a woman's right to choose, that it is an issue of reproductive freedom and justice. And so I don't think that whether a woman has the resources to cover her reproductive health care needs should determine whether she's able to get that health care. And so I would absolutely support and work for the opportunity that everybody have to exercise their choice. And, you know, I disagree with measures that have been taken to essentially stymie the ability of some women to not have that choice. Here in Texas, this is a tremendous example of what happens when people with a right-wing ideology take hold and they're able to keep some people out, right? As president, I will do everything that I can to ensure that everybody has that right.
Thank you, Secretary.
One more question from the audience. Welcome.
Hi, Secretary Castro. I'm going to be asking my question first in English and then in Spanish. My name is Jessica Suan. I'm from Texas Organizing Project, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. There are 140 million fellow Americans who live in persistent poverty right now. What would you do as president to address the poverty crisis in your first term? Now in Spanish. Mi nombre es Jessica, soy de Texas Organizing Project desde San Antonio, Texas. Hay actualmente 140 millones de americanos que viven en la pobreza actualmente. ¿Qué hará como presidente para abordar la crisis de la pobreza en su primer mandato?
Gracias por su pregunta, Jessica. I grew up with my brother Joaquin and my mother and my grandmother. My mother was raising us as a single parent after the age of 8. My parents were never married, but they split up when we were 8. And I know what it's like to struggle. And so I also know that we need to do many things and connect the dots. First of all, we need to raise the minimum wage. We need to support legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act so that women get paid equal pay for equal work, especially women of color who are shortchanged the most. We need to invest in things like affordable housing so that people, and we haven't done that in a serious way in 40 years, so that people can find a safe, decent, affordable place to live. We need to make sure that we invest in educational opportunity. That's why I support not only tuition-free public universities and community colleges and apprenticeship programs, but also starting at the beginning, childcare and universal pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, so that we help our families succeed. I also believe that we need to ensure that there's justice in our justice system. Right? Too many people are living in poverty today because they were incarcerated when they never should have been incarcerated in the first place. And I've called for giving people a first chance in life, because too oftentimes people, we don't even talk about a second chance. Too oftentimes people don't even get a first chance in life. And I believe that if we put all of those things together and other things, that we can ensure that we lift people out of poverty, in addition to tackling the bigger issues like a tax code that we need to rewrite to reward work instead of wealth, and so many other things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Secretary Castro, we've been asking each of the candidates, there are going to be 20 and counting as of Thursday. So why should women of color choose you as their nominee?
Thank you for the question. And, I grew up, I am only here because of two very strong women of color. My grandmother, Victoria, who came from Mexico when she was 7, she came across the border in 1922. She never finished elementary school, so she worked as a maid, a cook, and a babysitter for her whole life. And she raised my mom as a single parent. My mom was able to become the first one to graduate from high school and then go on to college, and she raised my brother and me as a single parent. And so I grew up seeing both the struggles and the promise of two strong women of color. And I have dedicated my time in public service to making sure that people just like my mother and my grandmother could do better in this country. It's why I focused in my time as mayor and as HUD secretary so much on trying to deliver for communities that are vulnerable, that are struggling, whether it was by passing pre-K for SA in San Antonio, by doing a sales tax initiative that people thought, like, why are you getting involved in education? You're the mayor, you have nothing to do with that. But I saw that as a key to making sure that people that are too often left behind could get ahead. I also, when we were at HUD, fought to make sure that people would not be discriminated against. We for instance, went after Wells Fargo and settled with them because they weren't giving mortgages to women who were pregnant, because they were assuming, well, they may not go back to work, and so they're more of a risk. We cracked down on things like that, right? I also see the intersectionality of all of these issues. When we were at HUD, for instance, we promulgated something called the Equal Access Order, an expansion of that, so that if you are part of the LGBTQ community, if you're transgender, that you could show up at a federally funded shelter and be accommodated according to your preference. Because we know that people are not they're not one-dimensional, right? They face many different struggles in their life. And to answer your question very directly, why should women of color choose me? It's because I have a track record. I have a track record of getting things done for vulnerable communities, especially women of color, and that is exactly what I will do if I'm elected President of the United States. Thank y'all very much.
Secretary Castro, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us to See the People. Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Castro!
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's introduce our next Candidate who's ready to come out, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much for joining us.
So great to be here. Thank you for doing this. How are you, Joy? Good to see you.
Thanks for coming all the way from Hawaii.
Aloha. How you guys doing? I could hear you all the way in the back. Sounds great.
This is not your average presidential forum, I'll tell you right now.
I'm loving it.
We're breaking the mold.
That's right.
Let's begin with this. As a veteran, what will you do to restore full service rights for transgender members of the military? And as a follow-up, what is your plan to ensure the full civil rights of transgender Americans?
You know, this is something that hits me close to home. I'm a soldier in the Hawaii Army National Guard. There you go. I've served for a little over 16 years and deployed twice to the Middle East. My first deployment was to Iraq in 2005, second in 2008, and serving downrange, serving in a war zone, serving with Americans from all across this country, including LGBTQ Americans. It is something that there's a bond. There's a bond where I knew that if it came down to it, they would give their life for me. I would give my life for them. Special, amazing, selfless people who said, I will lay my life down for this country. That's a special and rare thing, and we as a country need to honor that service. We need to end the trans ban and make sure that we are actually living up to that ideal and those freedoms that so many service members have sacrificed so much for over generations. Freedoms for every single American, which unfortunately for the LGBTQ community is still not realized today.
You know, and I have a question also touching on your service in the military and, of course, your service in Congress. A lot of it has been around foreign policy issues. You've really been upfront on those kinds of issues. A lot of us have just been reading through the Mueller report. It's quite lengthy. But one of the things that it touched on was the ways in which Russia specifically targeted communities of color, impersonating Black Lives Matter, going after women of color, Black women, and using that to divide the electorate and to discourage African American voters. And the second piece being literally targeting some of the voter rolls, going after voting systems in multiple states. Do you believe that Russia is a threat to the voting rights of people of color?
I think Russia, what was done, as well as any other country that seeks to interfere in our democracy and in our elections, is unacceptable, and it has to be taken seriously for the threat that it provides. I think it's important, that second point that you made about actually trying to interfere in the voter rolls, in our elections systems. This is the huge vulnerability that threatens our next election that so far, unfortunately, has not been addressed. The fact that there are still many states in this country who don't have paper ballots or any kind of auditable paper trail to make sure that whether it's another country or an individual rogue actor comes in and tries to manipulate our votes, tries to change our votes to change the outcome of this election, our system is vulnerable to those hacks and attacks today. So I've introduced legislation in Congress called the Securing America's Elections Act. Very simply put, solves this problem by making sure that every single state either uses paper ballots or has a voter-verified paper backup, so that we in this country have an auditable paper trail to protect our democracy.
And do you think the current administration is doing enough to combat that kind of interference in 2020?
No, and I'll take it a step further. This administration is not doing enough. The Department of Homeland Security, that has jurisdiction over our election security, is not doing nearly enough, and Congress is not doing enough. I introduced this legislation in 2017. It has not been taken up in committee or on the House floor, nor has there been any other meaningful reforms that would accomplish this same objective. It is essential for us as voters to have faith that when we cast that vote, our voices will be heard. That's what my bill does, and that's what Congress needs to pass.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to thank you very much for that. Let's have our first audience question. Welcome.
Hi, Congresswoman Gabbard.
Aloha.
My question for you, my name is Mara Zakaria, and my question for you is, what will you do to repeal the Muslim ban?
Thank you. Thank you for your question and for being here. Ever since President Trump put this ban in place, I have stood in strong opposition to it. And as president, I would lift that ban that is hurting and harming so many people and so many families, both here and in other countries around the world. I hear from both constituents of mine in Hawaii and friends in other parts of the country about their family members, their parents, siblings, uncles and aunts who previously would travel to and from the United States, whether it be from countries like Iran or other countries, and now are completely unable to do so. So this is something that's very important that has to be addressed, and I would do so as president. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
I want to follow up and say, in this era where Islamophobia is coming from the White House, what would you do to secure the civil rights of Muslim Americans?
This is such a dangerous time. You know, we just saw the attacks against Christians in their place of worship on Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka. We saw the terrorist attack against Muslims in their place of worship in Christchurch, terrorist attack against people who are worshiping in their synagogue in Pittsburgh. This is a time where we as a country, starting at the top, as president, but where all of us must stand up and condemn this hatred and bigotry and violence, whether it be based on religious reasons or the color of your skin or your ethnicity or where you come from. We have to speak with one voice to condemn this bigotry, to make it so that it is not okay, whether it be a slur or worse yet, an act of violence. This is not who we are in this country, and that leadership starts at the top. That leadership is what I would bring, coming from a place like Hawaii, where we are the most ethnically diverse state in the nation. We are diverse in many different ways. And what is so special is the aloha spirit, something that we call the aloha spirit, which basically means having respect and love and care for one another as children of God, bridging that divide that exists between us. Recognizing each other, respecting each other. We'll have our differences. We can disagree without being disagreeable, but it is that recognition and that care for each other that we need at the forefront of this country so badly.
And I believe, do we have one more question? I think we do. Come on out.
Hi.
Aloha.
Hi, Congresswoman Gabbard. My name is Sadie Hernandez, and I'm a member of United We Dream Action. I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, but I'm here to ask about something that affects all of us. Last year, Puerto Rico suffered a devastating hurricane and has only received a fraction of the promised $19 billion to rebuild and provide for our fellow citizens. What is your immediate commitment to Puerto Rico, and do you support statehood as a long-term solution?
Thank you for being here and for your engagement and your activity in dealing with the continued challenges that dreamers in this country face, but also in raising this important issue that Puerto Ricans are continuing to deal with in not getting that immediate response that they should have gotten from our country during a time of great need and horrific disaster. This is something that we in Congress have continuously been trying very hard to push for, recognizing that unlike what you may hear from others, Puerto Ricans are Americans too. So we need, I'm going to get to your second question, I'm not going to leave you hanging. So we need to make sure that our whether it's FEMA or other disaster response organizations within the federal government are providing every single resource that we have available to help in these recovery efforts, not only in the short term, in the first 30, 60, 90 days, but as we're continuing to see in Puerto Rico, that recovery is continuing. I support the Puerto Rican people's right to self-determination. And if that means statehood, then that should be supported. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. So our exit question with each of the candidates is, with so many options on the table, 20 that we know of, why should women of color choose you?
Look, again, coming from Hawaii, have a unique experience that I bring to the forefront and that I feel is so strongly needed in this country now. Not only in coming from such a diverse state and having these own experiences that I bring to the forefront, but really recognizing that as there are so many different issues and problems and challenges that we need to address in this country, at the heart of all of them is ultimately we have self-serving politicians looking out for their own interests, greedy corporate interests looking out for their own bottom line, and we, the people, get left behind. The vision that our founders had for this country of a government of, by, and for the people has been lost. So we need to change this corrupt culture that is standing in the way of progress, that is standing in the way of our voices being heard, that is standing in the way of our votes being counted. That needs to change. So as a soldier, someone who understands in a very deep and personal way what it means to put service above self, those values of putting service above self is what I will bring to the White House, to make sure that that mission, the mission of the President and the White House and our nation's capital, is solely focused on how we can best serve the American people.
Can I jump in and ask one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Because we do have the benefit of having you here and you're a military veteran. For veterans, for people who are serving and who would want to know what kind of a foreign policy that you would have, because that impacts them directly.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, what would be your posture toward the Yemen situation, toward Saudi Arabia, toward Syria?
Thank you. You're right. You know, I deployed twice to the Middle East, lost too many of my friends in combat, people who paid the ultimate price, as our country has unfortunately continued this policy of waging regime change wars in other countries around the world. Regime change wars that have not only taken such a high toll on our service members, on our veterans, on our military families, but have actually increased the suffering of people in the countries where we wage these wars, increased the death and destruction in their lives and in their community, all while actually making our country less safe, while increasing and strengthening terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This is what I will change as President and Commander-in-Chief, bringing these experiences to the forefront to end these destructive regime change war policies, focus on how we can actually strengthen our national security, to end U.S. support for Saudi Arabia and their genocidal war that's occurring in Yemen as we speak. U.S. support that's not been authorized by Congress and violates the War Powers Act.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of controversy over your stance towards Syria. Do you believe that the U.S. should stop engagement militarily in Syria? And what would be your posture as president toward Bashar al-Assad?
Our military's mission and purpose is to keep the American people safe. So our troops deployed to Syria initially to work with the Kurdish forces on the ground to go after and defeat ISIS. That mission has largely been accomplished. Unfortunately, as this was happening since 2011, covertly initially with the CIA, there was a regime change war that was launched during that time. As part of that war, and many of you may not even be aware of this, but our taxpayer dollars were being used to provide both direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in Syria like Al-Qaeda and others in order to go in and topple the Assad government. I had a chance to go to Syria, where I heard from the Syrian people. I heard from religious leaders who pleaded and begged for the United States to stop this support because they knew, whether there were some who supported their Assad government, others wanted to see him go, they knew that if the United States and other countries were successful in this regime change war, the most powerful force on the ground would fill that vacuum. And the most powerful force were these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, whose sole mission was to wipe out Christians and other religious minorities in Syria, anyone who did not adhere to their extremist ideology. So this is the reality that we face. There are, unfortunately, a lot of bad people in the world, some of them dictators and leaders of these other countries. The United States cannot continue to be in a position thinking that we can be the policemen of the world, spending trillions of taxpayer dollars coming out of our pockets, coming out of our communities, to go and launch these wars that we've seen in Iraq and Libya and Syria have caused so much suffering, taken countless lives. This cost is something that we cannot accept. We need to end these regime change wars, end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race we are in, and bring the trillions of dollars that we are spending on these wars and these weapons and invest them in our people, in our communities, by doing things like providing health care for all, by making sure we get a quality education for our kids, by making sure we're fixing the broken infrastructure in this country, by actually investing in our future.
And Congresswoman.
Thank you for answering the question.
Thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for
Great to
joining
see
us.
you.
Really appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joy. Nice
Cheers.
to see you.
And I'll walk you up this way.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Aloha.
Okay.
How you doing? Are you ready for a break?
You get one anyway. We will see you shortly. Take a break.
This is the way women of color take a break. We dance.
Okay.
Oh, I left my phone.
While we queue up the next senator.
Yes. Are
Okay.
y'all pumped?
Yep.
Okay.
You get what you need, yes? This is our house. We get to say, yes, yes. Y'all get crazy. Yes. This is how women of color take a break. Hands up. Oh, oh. This is how we take this break. Hey! Put it up, put it up. Lean, yes. I see you, sisters. Yes, yes. Where them hands at? Put it up, put it up, put it up. Where them hands at? Hey! Yes. Hey! Put it up, put it up. Yes. Swing. Yes. Hey. Hey. Oh, yeah. Y'all ready for that throwback? Hey. Y'all know this song is about me, right? I'm just saying. Right? Hey. Y'all know y'all want to move? Where my brick houses at? Put it up, put it up. Wow. Yeah, I guess so today. It's, yeah, with an I, Kandic. Whoever. Oh! This how we take a break up in here. TSU, how we take a break up in here? That's me, top one. Yeah.
My name is Dwight.
I look forward to connecting.
All right, She the People,
Mr.
take your
Mina
seats. We're going to
says
get started
so.
soon.
Miss Amina's in the house. Get hype, get hype. Get hype, get hype. Hey, get hype, get hype. 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 Mr. Mina says so. Hey!
Yeah, well, right, and the thing is, it's that experience of waking up in the first couple of seconds, like, where am I? It just, but he joined me last. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, they're all
My
there.
stage
Yeah,
manager?
I've got all my stuff.
What about everyone else's stage manager?
Well, so they're going to go out first for about 30 seconds. You're going to go about 30 seconds after them, okay? And when you go out, your chair, just so you know, it's the closest chair to us right there, okay?
Got it.
You already got your lob on,
Yeah.
and you're going to exit the other side stage right.
We'll get to that Syria issue, and I'm
we'll
glad I
send
got
people
in,
stage
got that
right
in.
to meet you over
Because that's
there,
the
okay?
thing that people want to know
Other than
about
that,
her.
there's a 16
We
minute
thought
timer
about
down there,
foreign
but
policy
you
versus
and Joanne
domestic
have done a great
policy.
job
Yeah.
controlling everything.
Welcome back to the stage, Amy and Joyanne.
Yeah, all right, we'll be right back.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
As soon as we get our seats.
You do not want to miss this next round. We have got more candidates answering your questions for She the People. We were just talking, Amy and I, about how important this is, that women of color speak for themselves, get their issues on the table with the people who can make a difference. So congratulations to yourselves.
Yes, and I'm going to tell you, because we have limited time, the person that's standing next to you, just tap them nicely and say,
turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, it's time to get to our seats so we can hear this forum. And say, if you need me to walk with you, I'll walk with you. Come on, let's go. It's like church, no walking during service.
And a reminder, for those of you with cell phones, hashtag #SheThePeople2020. You see us trending nationally? Tell people MSNBC is carrying the live stream on Twitter and Facebook. Tell people what's going on. You are not going to want to miss this. And all you good people in front, meeting and greeting each other.
Yeah, do less of that. There we go.
All right.
You can text them from your seat when you're sitting down. All right, we're going to introduce our next candidate. So everybody, hustle to your seats. Time is up. Love you too. This is like when the offertory ends. When the offering is over, what do we do? We sit back down.
Sit back down. I'd like to bring to the stage California Senator Kamala Harris.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Look what you, oh, this is fantastic. Oh my goodness.
Well, we waited for them to sit down.
Have shown up.
Now they're all right, well, let's dive right into it.
Okay. Look what you've done.
I'm pretty proud.
This is pretty extraordinary.
I'm really proud.
Is really phenomenal.
People came a long way.
This is
took off
truly
work.
what Maya Angelou had in mind when she talked about phenomenal women.
Yes.
This is extraordinary.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's talk about something serious, which is that in the era of marijuana legalization in blue states such as California,
yes,
and in other places in the U.S., what will you do as president to address the historic harm that has been done to our communities of color, and the deleterious effects of the war on drugs, supported by many Democrats decades past, and the expansion of the industrial prison complex, what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow?
That's right. So let's start with the fact I am in favor of and believe strongly that we have got to legalize marijuana. And it has led to the criminalization of and contributed to the problem of mass incarceration in our country, and has led disproportionately to the criminalization of young black and brown men in this country. So there's that. There is the broader point about the failed war on drugs. There's no question it was a failure. And part of the problem was that what is essentially a public health issue became a criminal justice issue. And then now, thankfully, some have evolved around the opioid issue. But look, where were they when we had what was called the crack epidemic, right? And so we know that this is a system, in particular around the criminalization of drug use and possession, that has been infected by racial bias. And we have to speak truth about that. We have to speak truth in terms of the way that enforcement happened and what the result was in terms of mass incarceration. So one, we need to decriminalize and actually legalize marijuana use. Second, we need to deal with the real issue, which is the issue of undiagnosed, untreated trauma, in particular in poor communities and communities of color, which leads to predictable behaviors, including self-medication, because of a lack of public health resources in those communities, a lack of mental health resources in those communities. And I will tell you, as President of the United States, one of the things that I will implement is that we have mental health care on demand, and we have drug treatment on demand, because right now, even for those folks who are short of a crisis, let's say a suicidal episode, and then they can go to an emergency room, short of that, folks need to wait in line 3 to 6 months to get treatment. And so what ends up happening, during that period of time, they are still feeling the effects of their addiction and are exposed then to the possibility of being incarcerated. So all of these issues are connected. But one of the big failures of the government of the United States has been the failure to address mental health and the need for significant mental health treatments. And the other is to address the years of trauma that have existed because of exposure to violence and the trauma that poverty produces that has been undiagnosed and untreated. And I would absolutely put in place a priority around that, including putting resources through the federal government that can go into the states to address these issues. And I've done this work. Back when I was in San Francisco years ago, I worked with a woman by the name of Nadine Burke, who I counsel everyone to get her book, The Deepest Well, where she talks about what we know to be true, which is that in communities of color in particular, and this disproportionately impacts women of color who are raising families, we have children who have been exposed to trauma, and it could be a relative has been shot or killed, if the child has been in the foster care system, if a child is growing up with an incarcerated parent, and all of the trauma that might result from that, and how that can also manifest itself in terms of health outcomes, in terms of what we see in objective factors around exposure to trauma and health outcomes. These things are all related. And so when we expect that child to go to school the next day and learn without putting serious effort into helping that child deal with their trauma, it is destined to failure, which is what we are seeing.
I have a couple quick follow-ups for you, Senator. One,
thank you.
Would you broadly use your pardon power as president to release federal prisoners who are in prison merely for drug possession and drug-related crimes? Would you use that on a broader basis than you saw President Obama and previous presidents use?
Well, we certainly have seen this president do nothing about it except try to pardon his friends. So let's start there. But yeah, absolutely. And we have to have the courage to recognize that there are a lot of folks who have been incarcerated who should not have been incarcerated and are still in prison, in large part because, to your point, Joy, they were convicted under draconian laws. They were convicted under draconian laws that have incarcerated them for, in some cases, a lifetime based on what is essentially a public health issue. So yes, I would.
I heard someone call out Colorado when you talked about legalization of marijuana. One of the things that's happening is in states like Colorado, where you do have some legalization, is you still have a stratified system where somebody who has a criminal record cannot get into the industry, they cannot get licensed to participate. And so you're seeing a gentrification of legalized marijuana. The industry is open to people with a lot of capital, with a lot of cash to spend, and who are then, in turn, also gentrifying neighborhoods. I grew up in Colorado. I can tell you the neighborhoods that used to be very tough neighborhoods are now very expensive.
No, I know, you're exactly right.
What could be done about that?
So first, what we've got to do is, like in my hometown of Oakland, California, what has happened is that there have been policies that have said that the young, invariably a lot of the people who historically were arrested for marijuana sales were young men of color. And so isn't that the irony of it all? That now this is one of the fastest growing money-making industries in our country. And the very young men who were trying to make money doing the same thing, but got criminalized and have now been branded felons for life, are excluded from the economic opportunities that are now available because of this new industry. So part of what has to happen is there have to be policies in place that look at the background and actually do the work of saying that some of those young men should be first in line to get the jobs that are available. And that their felony convictions should not be the barrier to them having employment in an industry that they were a part of before it was an industry.
Thank you for that.
Right? They were ahead of the curve.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple of questions from the audience. Let's have the first one. Welcome.
Hi,
How you
Senator
doing?
Harris.
It's good to see you.
I'm Nikema Williams,
Yes.
and I have a little crew with me today.
Yes.
I serve as the Deputy Executive Director of Care and Action, but I'm also a state senator in the battleground state of Georgia.
Yes.
In November, while standing peacefully with my constituents in the Georgia state capitol, demanding that every vote be counted in the historic 2018 elections, I was arrested, along with 14 other Georgians, for making our voices heard. Counting every vote is the basic practice to a functioning democracy. How do you intend to protect Americans' votes and expand participation and access to democracy for everyone, no matter their party affiliation?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. And thank you for your leadership, because Georgia is a battleground on so many issues, and not only about taking the country through the national election, but also we have seen rampant discrimination and abuse and, frankly, violations of the law as it relates to voting rights. And we saw the incredible work of Stacey Abrams there in terms of trying, right? So here's what I say about it. First of all, so elections matter. So forever, we would talk about in a presidential race the importance of the United States Supreme Court. And often in every election cycle, it is the most important, but often, unfortunately, the least persuasive reason for people to care about the outcome of the election is the United States Supreme Court. But we know that there are consequences for who will be president and what kind of court they will shape. So, on this subject, in 2013, the United States Supreme Court wrote Shelby v. Holder, which gutted the Voting Rights Act. And almost immediately thereafter, states put in place laws to discriminate and to create barriers for folks from voting. And it was targeted at people of color, it was targeted at students, it was targeted at Native Americans. And what we saw around this country, there were at least 22 states that almost immediately after that court decision put in discriminatory laws and laws that were designed to suppress folks' rights to vote. In fact, in North Carolina, the law was challenged to the point that the Court of Appeals, when reviewing the law that legislature passed, said that it was written with, quote, surgical precision to deny folks the right to vote. So it's a real issue and it's a current issue. And so elections matter, both in terms of who is president of the United States and who is the Secretary of State of any given state and who is the governor of any given state. So let's, one, recognize the connection between elections and this issue. Two, let's recognize that until we can correct some of these laws, the way that we are going to get to the goal of ensuring that everyone exercise their right to vote is we are going to have to invest in community. We're going to have to invest in community leadership, because we've right now got a lot of obstacles that until we get done with the legislation that is aimed at fixing the problems, until we get done with the litigation that is aimed at, holding people accountable that are suppressing the vote, until we get that done, in the interim, we need to strengthen the community-based organizations that are focused on getting folks registered and helping them to the polls. But hold on, guys, there's one more piece of this. There's one more piece of this. Having done work my entire life aligned with our civil rights community, forever, this is not a new issue, voter suppression, not a new issue at all. Forever we have talked about the way to approach it, about litigation, legislation, and then obviously mobilization and community organization. There's a whole new 21st century version of this that we need to really be clear about. And that is manipulation by foreign governments in our election. Now, be clear. No, wait, but see, so here's the thing. The intelligence community came out with a report of what happened in 2016. Now let's speak truth, because some people aren't clear about this. Not any of us, we're clear. Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States. Okay, so the intelligence community has done a report on what happened. Included in that analysis is that an adversarial country who was attempting to destabilize our democracy decided that they would try and interfere with our elections and make the American public insecure and suspicious. And so they decided to target our vulnerabilities. And they exposed America's Achilles heel. You know the issue that they kept bringing up because they knew it would cause heat and dissension among us? Race. So guess what? The irony of it all is that what otherwise we have been always knowing as a civil rights issue has now become a national security issue. And we need to deal with it, and we need to deal with it knowing what they did in 2016, because it didn't result in any real consequence. They will do again in 2020, and it will be about misinformation that is being done with a targeted effort to create dissension, which will lead to suppression, because people will just get turned off, and they'll decide, you know what, I don't like any of these people, I'm just not gonna vote. So we're gonna have to really be vigilant in calling out the untruths when we see them, because I think this is where the power of the people is gonna be critical to counteracting what will invariably be efforts to manipulate this election for President of the United States.
Right. Thank you. One more, come on, quickly.
Hi, hello, Senator Harris. My name is Lucy, and I'm with United We Dream.
Yay.
Action. Okay. I'm 18 years old, and I will vote for the first time in the 2020 elections.
That's fantastic.
I have family members who are undocumented and live in danger every day.
Yeah.
As president, what will you do to stop deportation agents from tearing more families apart?
Right. So, first of all, we need a president of these United States who understands that we are a nation of immigrants, and instead of vilifying folks because he's trying to scapegoat folks to distract from the fact that he ain't done nothing, we need to have a president of the United States who understands that if we are going to be true to the values of who we say we are, if we are going to be true to the actual history of what created us and who we are, then we will have a commitment from the President of the United States, which is the President of the United States I will be, that will pass comprehensive immigration reform, that will stop allowing the United States government to commit a human rights abuse at the border, which is what this family separation policy has been. I will be a president of the United States that keeps our word to those dreamers that we gave DACA protection instead of pulling it out. I will be a president who understands that those young people who are DACA recipients and dreamers did not just fall out of the sky onto the earth. They have parents who also deserve protection. And we just need a president of the United States who uses her bully pulpit in a way that understands that if we are going to be strong as a country, we must be committed to our stated values. That's part of what has given us strength on this globe. And right now we are ceding that power when we have a president of the United States that is using that bully pulpit to divide and to sow hate. We've got to end that.
Senator, as a brief follow-up to the last question, what would be your immediate action in the first 100 days related to tent cities and detained migrants and the whole infrastructure that's been set up at the border?
Yeah. So first of all, what we have to do is that there needs to be real resources that are put into allowing these families to have their process for determining their status in terms of, in particular, asylum. And again, we need to, this is the problem, part of the problem with the issue is that it has been mischaracterized by very powerful people. Let's understand what's happening. We have families that are fleeing murder capitals of the world. Most people don't want to leave their home. Like, just think about the nature of it. Most people don't want to leave the place where they were born, where their parents were born, where their grandparents were born, with the place that is familiar to them, the culture that is familiar to them. When people leave, it is usually because they have to. So let's first of all understand the nature of what we're talking about. Okay, so then we are talking about what have been documented to be murder capitals of the world. Then let's talk about the fact that there are families who have made a decision, parents who have made a decision, to put their children in what they know could be a perilous journey of traveling through the entire country of Mexico to come to the United States because those parents decided the fate that they are now facing if they stay at home is worse than what they may endure. And then what happens when they arrive at our borders? We who have erected the Statue of Liberty, they arrive at our borders and we say, go back to where you came from. That is inhumane and it is immoral. And so I come at the subject from that perspective.
We are out of time, so we're going to get your first 100 days. You're going to do?
First 100 days, I'm going to pass the LIFT Act, which is what I am proposing is that we change the tax code of this country, and that for families that are making less than $100,000 a year, those families receive a $6,000 tax credit. They can receive it up to $500 a month. This will uplift 1 in 2 American families, 2 in 3 American children. 60% of African American households in poverty will be lifted out of poverty because of this. And the other thing that I will do, if Congress fails to act with smart gun safety laws, I will execute executive action to put in place what is long overdue and people have had the courage to do, or lack the courage to do.
And we're almost out of time,
Okay.
but we've asked every candidate on this stage, why should women of color choose you as a nominee for president?
Because of my track record, my entire life, of focusing on women of color, be it in terms of health care. I am a leader on the issue of maternal mortality that invariably and disproportionately impacts women of color, on my history and long-term work in terms of education, including what I'm proposing right now, which is to close the teacher pay gap, which will disproportionately impact children of color and the women of color that are raising them. For my work on criminal justice reform, my work when it comes to economic security and health for women and women of color, and that includes a number of things, including what I am proposing that we do in terms of closing the pay gap as it relates to women of color, which right now is about 54 cents and 61 cents on the dollar for Latinas and African American women. There is a long history of work I have done, including my mentorship of young women of color in politics and in the professions. And I would stake my reputation in terms of what I will do going forward based on what I've done, and I believe you can judge me that way.
Senator Kamala Harris, thank you so much for joining us here at See the People. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It goes by fast.
I could be here for another hour.
Senator Kamala Harris, and we'll go,
thank you. All right, I believe our next candidate is Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Hey there. Thank you for joining us at See the People.
Hello, great to see you.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow, what a crowd.
Oh yeah, never seen a crowd like this.
I was thinking though that there is only one Amy in Congress and we need a second one.
Oh.
Ooh.
Okay.
I like you already. Let's begin with our first, a very serious topic. Philando Castro was killed in your home state by a policeman, and there's ample and very painful evidence of relentless violence against black and brown people nationwide. what is your commitment and what will be your commitment as president to lead a national effort to implement anti-racism statutes and policies, particularly when it comes to policing, and how can the federal government protect citizens from harm and criminalization at the hands of police?
Thank you for that question. And I'm sure many of you know that sad and horrific tale of Philando Castile, who was literally shot just driving and stopped for really not a good reason and was killed by a police officer. I supported the prosecution of that police officer, and he was prosecuted. Unfortunately, the jury did not come back with a guilty verdict. But what we learned as a community in that case was you had this young man who worked in a cafeteria at his school, and he was loved by the students. They all adored him, and we lost him. I have met with his family, and it just reminds you of what we are dealing with right now in the criminal justice system. I have a law enforcement background, so I'm able to see it, and I've seen the racism that's in our system, and I've also seen the good work that we can do together. So I would say, first of all, our police departments and our prosecutors' offices have to reflect the community that we serve, and so do our grand juries. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to train and put the money into training our officers. We have to pursue those cases when they violate the law. We have to take responsibility for those cases when they happen. And we also have to have a system that works. One of the things that I've been focused on since getting to the United States Senate is on our nonviolent drug offenses that have gotten ridiculously long on the federal level. I wrote a piece recently about a woman named Josephine that served 24 years for a nonviolent drug offense. She wasn't even doing drugs. She wasn't even selling drugs. And President Obama finally pardoned her. And in her words, she can now go back to being a grandma. True story. What do we need to do? We did one thing, the First Step Act that Cory and Kamala and I all co-sponsored, and that allows finally a reduction in those federal drug sentences. The second thing that we need to do is the Second Step Act, because 90% of people incarcerated in this country are not in federal prisons. They are in state and local jails. And so that step will mean putting out the incentives so the states do the right thing. And the last thing I would say is re-entry. With the exception of violent offenders, murderers, heinous murderers, most people are going to be getting out of prison. And I was long involved in a program where you visited someone in prison. I visited her for years in prison, and she is now out. And that's what's going to happen to a lot of people. And we got to make sure that they're able to get jobs. The administration just did a really bad thing in that regard when it comes to diversion programs today that I oppose. We've got to make sure that people are able to vote when they get out of prison. We have to make sure that they're able to participate in our community. And those are all things in addition to how our criminal justice system acts. Equally importantly is how we allow people, when they get back into our society, to contribute.
And you talked about, as a quick follow-up, having a law enforcement background and a background as a prosecutor. One of the reasons it's so rare for police officers to be convicted in cases like Philando Castile's and others, no matter what the circumstances, police officers get the automatic presumption, essentially a presumption that they are in the right, so long as they can assert that they feared for their life. And it's really on the officer's word most of the time. At least that's the perception of most of the public. Do you support laws that give officers so much of a presumption of being in the right in shootings of unarmed civilians? Or should the laws be changed either to change that presumption to make there be more investigation, or to take the decision on prosecution out of the hands of prosecutors who are often working hand in hand with the police?
Okay, so a few things on that. Obviously, we should look at those laws. They're state by state, and I think they vary. But the things that I think are a problem, when I was a prosecutor, everything went to the grand jury. That's how we did it back then, when there was a shooting. And I think there needs some more accountability with the individual county attorney, in my case, prosecutor, looking at those cases themselves and owning what happens. I think the investigation should not be done by the police department where the officer worked. I feel very strongly, and I actually I actually took a stand on this way back when I had that job before, that shouldn't happen. So I think you have to have a fair process when you investigate these cases.
We have a couple questions from our audience members. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. That is very cool.
Thank you.
You guys you can't see the orange hair on your side, but it's very, very cool. There we go.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar.
Hello.
My name is June Barrett. I am a elder caregiver from Miami, and I'm here with Care in Action. I'm one of the millions of domestic workers, mostly women and women of color who care for our children, the elderly, people with disability, and keep homes clean and safe. But too often it is poverty wage work. Our work is essential and it makes everything in the economy possible. But too often it is poverty work without benefit. I myself struggle to afford health care and cannot afford the high copay and deductibles charged by private health insurance companies. The need for care is on the rise. And care workers.
You're okay. You're doing great. You're doing great. You're great. Okay.
And care workers who do this essential work cannot care for their own families. How will you lead the creation of an inclusive care system that ensures that everyone can have access to quality care and caregivers who do this work can live with dignity?
Thank you. That's a great question.
Wait for your answer. Wait for your answer.
Come on.
Wait for your answer.
Okay. Thank you. Because I want to look at you when I answer this. So thank you for your work. And thank you for doing. My dad is in assisted living, so I see firsthand how hard caregivers work every single day. So let me start with this. First of all, you should have good pay, and that means a $15 minimum wage at a minimum, all right? Secondly, we should make sure that unions are able to organize and not cut down on those rights. And we have an administration in place right now that seems to try to talk the talk of standing up for workers, but then every time there's a choice for a judge, they pick one that's anti-union, right? Anytime there's a choice for legislation or someone they put in the National Labor Relations Board, they go with someone that's anti-union. That's wrong. The third thing is your health care. Everyone in this country should have a right to affordable health care. And right now we have something that we worked on very hard to get in place, and that is the Affordable Care Act. That was President Obama's signature work. But that was a beginning and not an end. And I believe we have to do more. The first thing I would do is immediately put in place and put forward legislation for a public option so that we have an option that's either Medicare or Medicaid based. The second thing I would do is take on the pharmaceutical companies. They think that they own Washington. They don't own me. They don't own me. And that means negotiation for Medicare prices. It means bringing in less expensive drugs. It means stopping this practice where they keep their competitors off the market. So you do incredibly difficult work, and your work should be treated with respect and dignity, and that means getting paid and having health care.
There were a couple questioners, Medicare for all. Where are you on Medicare for all?
I have open to looking at Medicare for all, but I honestly want to get there sooner. And I think the first thing we need to do is to build on President Obama's work and put in place a public option.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, we have another question.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, Senator Klobuchar.
Hello.
My name is Isha Pandit. I work at the
I wish
Center
everyone could come
for
up here,
Advancing
'cause
Innovative
it's cool.
Policy, and I live
Yes.
here in Houston,
Yes,
Texas.
very good.
Welcome.
It's great to be here.
I'm also the daughter of immigrants who taught me that education is power, that education is everything. And so my question is, what will you do to address the student loan crisis, especially its disproportionate impact on women of color who are more likely to take on debt?
Yes, and when you look at the numbers, it's women of color that gets hurt more than anyone from what's been going on with our college system. So just so you know about me, I wouldn't be here without education. My grandpa was an underground miner, and he had to quit high school so he could work to raise his 9 brothers and sisters. He saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college. My dad went to a 2-year college and then to a 4-year college he finished up. My mom actually grew up poor in Milwaukee, and she ended up going to Minnesota because they had a strong teachers union. And she taught 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. So I am before you today as the first woman elected to the state of Minnesota and a candidate for President of the United States because of education. So what I would do is this. First of all, I think everyone should be able to get college and should be able to get a degree. How do you do that? First of all, you make sure that it is affordable for people, and I would do it based on need. I would expand the Pell Grants that we have in place. Those are better than loans, right? And they right now have a $6,000 limit and a $50,000 limit on income. I would greatly expand that. How would I pay for it? By getting rid of the situation where Warren Buffett actually pays less in taxes than his own secretary. Like, that's wrong. That brings in $125 billion right there. All right. The other thing that I would do is that I would make it easier to get these tax credits for families so that that's easier for them to afford college. I would make 2-year community college free, right? Because right now, there are many people that are just going off the grid and they're not even graduating from high school. And the way you get them in jobs is by exposing them to apprenticeships and making it easy to get those community college degrees, both while they're in high school and where they're out of high school. And the final thing I would do, as we're here in Texas, is comprehensive immigration reform. Because if we don't have that, if we don't make it easier for all kids to pursue the American dream, and I know there's dreamers out there who, by the way, have every right to be in this country and have every right to participate in the education in this country, that want to serve in the military. And with comprehensive immigration reform, it would make it a lot easier for millions of people to pursue an education and fill the jobs that we have open in America today. So I see it as a moral imperative, but I also see it as an economic imperative. And one time I found a 99-year-old Hispanic veteran. I was trying to make the case at home. And this was a guy that was brought over from Mexico. He lived in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. He didn't know that he had been brought over as a kid. He thought he was born in our country. He signed up to fight in World War II. That's when he found out. And back then he told me, you know how you became an American citizen? He said, they brought me to Canada, the Army did, for one night, and I stayed in a hotel, and I came back and I was a citizen. That's what they used to do. He served under General MacArthur. He came back. He met his wife. They had a child. That kid served in the Vietnam War, and I brought that veteran to stand at the World War II memorial with 2 dreamers from the suburbs who wanted to serve in the Air Force, and they couldn't because of our laws now. That's wrong, and we need to change it. So if you look at education, you look at making it affordable for everyone, but you specifically look at how we're handling the immigrant community. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're asking each of the candidates to make the case of why women of color should choose them. You are a Midwestern candidate. Part of the tug of war in the Democratic Party is whether to try to go for the Midwest and try to convert Trump voters, or try to go for the base and really bring out particularly African-American women who are such reliable voters. If your base is really Midwestern voters, if your sort of a great selling point is that you can bring over white working class voters, then why should women of color believe that you are their champion?
Okay, good. Here we go. First of all, we have to do both to win, all right? And we have to do both. You look at what happened in this last election. You think of the anniversary, Shirley Chisholm, the first woman, African-American woman in Congress. Guess what? 50 years later to the day, for the first time, we elected 20 African-American women to Congress. That is the arc of justice, and we need more. Certainly in the last election, when you look at how close we were in states, if Stacey Abrams, the great Stacey Abrams, by the way, if she had had a fair shot with the election, she would have won that governorship of Georgia, and we saw change across the country. So how would I lead this ticket, and why am I the one to do it? First of all, I can't pretend to be in your shoes. I'm in one of your shoes as the first woman in many of the jobs I've had, and I know what it's like to be in that room when people aren't taking you seriously. But I can't imagine what it would be like to be the woman who was in the maternity room in that hospital in New Orleans that's telling her doctor that her fingers are swelling and he's not listening and she loses her baby. Or what it's like to be a vice president as a company, someone I know who goes shopping and then gets followed by store security. That happened. I can't imagine what it is like to make, so African-American woman to make 61 cents an hour compared to what a man makes, right? A white man. That's wrong. But what I can tell you is that my entire life I have fought for justice. I fought for justice in the Senate. I've been a lead on many of those bills involving voting. Sherrod Brown and I are leading the bill to stop the voting purges, because if you want a seat at the table, you can't be on the menu, and you've got to be able to vote in this democracy. So that's my first thing. The second thing is looking at our economy, where African-American women have not been treated fairly. And if we want an economy that works for everyone, we have to make these leaders in these companies understand that they've got high-paying job open in the technology field. The answer is in this room, right? Those are the people that should be applying for their jobs. And the first, one of the first bills that this president, who I believe has turned his back on African-American women, that this president signed into law was a bill I led that allowed more women and it created incentives for women of color to get into the STEM fields. Yeah. Did he invite me to the bill signing? No, he did not. But it was my bill. And so when we look,
and Senator,
and so
we're almost
the end
out of time.
is, and I will end with this, it was Barbara Jordan from this great state who once said that what Americans want is something quite simple. They want a country as good as its promise. Let's make good on this promise.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for joining us at She the People.
Amy.
Thank you.
I look forward to being on this show.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
How's everyone doing? You good?
All right.
I'd like to welcome to the stage former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
You're a lot taller.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Please have a seat.
Thank you.
We're here in Texas.
That's right.
You
Good
got
to see everybody.
Yeah, you got some
We got to
fans.
play Homecoming again for the second time.
All right, welcome, and thank you for joining us here at She the People.
Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be in the home district of Sheila Jackson Lee, back at TSU. Thank you for hosting us, and with the two of you, thank you for the invitation to join you. We're glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to talk voting rights to kick things off. One of the most important outcomes of 2018 was in Florida, the passage of Amendment 4. Some of the amazing organizers behind that victory are in the audience today, and it paved the way to restore voting rights to formerly incarcerated people. So what would you do as president to build on these kind of victories, to expand the voting rights for people that have been caught up in the criminal justice system in every state?
Yeah. First of all, let's build on the great work that you have done in Florida. Let's pick up the message and the inspiration laid down by Stacey Abrams in Georgia and her response to the State of the Union, where she made this the central theme. Let's follow the lead of the Texas Organizing Project here in Houston, Texas, and Harris County, which ensured that no one is written off and helped to inform those who had been convicted in Texas of their voting rights and that they could register once again and participate in their democracy. And it is owing to them and the leadership that we especially saw here in this community that Texas, which had been 50th in the country in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy any less than anyone else, but because we were drawn that way by our state legislature. We have voter ID laws that say you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but you cannot use your student ID from TSU to prove who you are at the ballot box. We've got to overcome the institutional racism in our democracy, especially in the states of the former Confederacy, with a new Voting Rights Act that I want to sign into law, automatic voter registration for every 18-year-old coming of age, same-day voter registration in this country, ending gerrymandering, and we are at the epicenter of some of the worst of it here in Texas, and yes, making sure that those who have convictions, who have done time in a country whose criminal justice system is one of the most unjust in the world, where it is disproportionately comprised of people of color. Let us make sure that we restore their full rights, including their right to vote. Thank you for asking.
Congressman, we know that the Trump administration is right now attempting to add a citizenship question to the census, to the 2020 census, which most experts believe would depress responses to the census, could actually disenfranchise many Americans of color because it could reduce the number of representatives, and it could also just put fear into communities with lots of immigrants in them. Texas is one of those states that would be hard hit on all of those fronts. If the Supreme Court affirms and allows this administration to add that question to the census, then what can be done to ensure that people feel confident and comfortable answering the census, that you don't see a depression in responses that can hurt, particularly immigrant communities here in Texas?
Absolutely. So this is a question about who is counted and who counts in our communities and in our country. I can tell you from the perspective of El Paso, which forms the largest binational community with Ciudad Juarez in the Western Hemisphere, and also happens to be one of the safest cities in the United States, 20 years running. That safety is not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. It is because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. And when you listen to our local law enforcement leadership, including Sheriff Richard Wiles, he will tell you that when those in our community, including those in mixed immigration status households, trust law enforcement, they're more willing to report a crime, serve as a witness, testify in a trial, demonstrably make us safer because they feel free to participate. When people fear their government, law enforcement, participating, it will make us not more, it will make us less safe. And here we are in the most diverse city in the United States of America, bar none. It is hard to think, as you suggested, of a community or a state that will be hit harder by this misinformed and maybe malicious decision than Texas. It means that we lose out on funding for schools, for infrastructure, for quality of life and opportunity and an ability to fully participate in this economy. And it sows fear in our communities at a time that we need to bring everyone together and out of the shadows to build our country's greatness. As president, I would nominate a Secretary of Commerce who would make sure that everyone is counted, everyone is included. If this decision is upheld by the Supreme Court, it is one that we will challenge from our administration, make sure that is overturned and that everyone in this country is counted.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I believe you have questions?
Yeah.
Let's bring on our first questioner.
Hello, my name is Damaris. I'm a 17-year-old undocumented student. I'm here with United We Dream Action. I know that you're from a border city, and you have seen the horrible detention camps there and in other states. What is your plan to pass new citizenship laws and protect immigrants from deportation? My life and many of these beautiful people's lives are on the line. So how are you going to make sure that these immigrants are protected and not harmed?
Damaris, thank you. Thanks for being here and for the question and for your leadership. And it is a reminder to me, to all of us, that the great changes that we have seen in this country's history has so often been produced and purchased by the service and the sacrifice of young people like you. We were just in Greensboro, North Carolina, and we think about the Greensboro Four, who helped to integrate places of public accommodation, the Rock Hill Nine the Friendship Nine in Rock Hill, South Carolina, the Freedom Riders in the Deep South, the Dreamers today who are standing up not just for themselves, for their parents, the original Dreamers, and for immigrants across this country from every place on this planet, to make sure that they are permanently freed from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in this country. That would be the first order of business. Ensuring that their parents and millions more can come out of the shadows as well, contribute to their full potential, to their families, to their communities, and to this country's greatness and to our shared success. And you mentioned these detention camps that we saw in Tornillo, Texas. What I saw from you, from the people of Texas, is that with under 24 hours notice, more than 1,000 of you showed up in the Chihuahuan desert outside of Tornillo to bear witness, to testify, to make sure that our fellow Americans understood what was being done in our names, that we were taking children from their mothers and fathers after having completed a more than 2,000-mile journey, fleeing the deadliest places on the planet today, trying to follow our own asylum laws, and I would argue being illegally blocked and rejected and arrested and separated and caged by this president and this administration. Leadership like yours forced the administration, at least temporarily, to stop separating families. Now the onus is on us not only to pass comprehensive immigration reform that we just described, but to ensure that not another child is taken from another parent and that we reunite those families who've been separated so far. So thank you, Maris, for being here.
May I ask you a quick follow-up? There are still some children that have not been returned to their parents. Should there be some sort of civic sanction for those who advocated a policy of separating mothers and fathers from their children and not returning them?
I think without accountability, you won't have justice. Without justice, you will not have rule of law in this country. And without accepting that no person, no matter what office he occupies, is above the law, then this country's not going to fulfill its promise or live according to its constitution. So yes, there have to be consequences for people who rejected asylum seekers who were lawfully trying to present themselves at our international ports of entry with not a penny to their name, fearing for their lives and the lives of their kids, attempted again to follow our laws by crossing in between ports of entry, arrested themselves. And this is the parlance of the Border Patrol agents. They tell us they don't flee detection and apprehension. They turn themselves in, seeking refuge and shelter from a country of refugees and asylum seekers, and to be met not with salvation, but your worst nightmare, that child torn from your arms by force, put into a cage, you deported back to the very country from which you fled. Yes, there has to be consequence for those kind of actions. And I want to make sure we hold everyone responsible, accountable.
You mean legal sanction, a civic sanction, lawsuits? What do you mean?
Absolutely. Where people broke the law. And my understanding, especially when it comes to our asylum laws, it is very clear. If you come here, petition for asylum, which affords you no guarantee that petition will be accepted, that you will be able to stay here, but that you at least be allowed to follow that process here on U.S. soil. That's the law, at least as I understand it. I want to make sure that it is followed, and those who defy it are held accountable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think someone was asking, should ICE be disbanded?
I hear you on this. The practices under this president, the practices under the last president, where families were broken up, where you had internal enforcement. I think in 1 year alone in the previous administration, 400,000 deportations from inside the United States. Some people who had been here for decades, who posed no threat to their families, to their communities, to this country. In fact, in any way that you can measure, are contributing far more than they are ever taking. And I made the case earlier using El Paso as the example, are also contributing to our security and to our safety. We don't need those internal roundups and deportations and enforcement. We do need to make sure that anyone who threatens the lives of our fellow Americans or who has used violence, that there is accountability, okay? But I want to make sure that we include everyone in the solution to our challenges economic, security, safety, democratic, or otherwise. And having these ICE internal enforcement operations is not the way to do it. So
under
appreciate
an
the
O'Rourke
question.
administration, will ICE exist? Yes or no?
Yes, it will, but it will not employ those practices that we've seen not just under this administration, but under the previous administration.
Thanks
Thanks
you.
for asking.
Thank you. Let's have our second question from the audience. Thank you. Welcome to the stage.
Hi, Congressman O'Rourke. My name is Takiva Russell. I'm a member leader of Restaurant Opportunity Centers, and I'm a server in New Orleans where the minimum wage is just $2.13 an hour. Most of the 5 million tip workers and 13 million restaurant workers across the country who earn that ridiculous sub-minimum wage are women and people of color like me who have to deal with and suffer from sexual harassment just to get the tips and wages that we deserve. For example, I was working a night shift at my job, and I was turned down tip from a male customer who refused to give me a tip because I refused to give him my number. So there are currently 2 bills that have been introduced in Congress to get rid of the lower wage for tipped workers so that we get a full livable minimum wage like everyone else. So Congressman O'Rourke, my questions to you are, what are your plans to ensure that all workers, including tip workers like me, get the full wages that we deserve so that we can feed our families without being harassed daily?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, for offering your experience as an example for the urgency with which we must meet this challenge. So yes, I support a $15 minimum hourly wage in this country for everyone without exception, regardless of your occupation. I want to make sure that you are protected from harassment and intimidation in your place of work. So I want to strengthen those protections and the accountability and justice for those who violate the protections that are in place. But I also want to acknowledge that a minimum wage is not going to be enough, especially when it comes to women of color. Women alone in this country are paid 80 cents on average what a man is paid for the same job. But African American women, 61 cents of what a man is paid. Latinas, 53 cents of what a man is paid. We also need an equal rights amendment ratified in this country so that no woman can be discriminated against on any basis whatsoever. So those are the ways that I want to meet this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And a follow-up for the ERA, since that's a big one. As a president, how would you champion an ERA for the 21st century?
You know, I would make sure that we have conversations just like the one that we had. It's not enough to be on the right side of this issue, to lay out a vision for where we need to get to. I think bringing everybody in, as we learn traveling to the 254 counties of the state of Texas, no matter how red or blue, how big or small, nobody written off, everyone included in the conversation. And what we found time and again were so many inspiring examples of local leadership. I think of one in particular, a councilwoman in DeSoto, Texas, Candace Quarles, who just helped to pass paid family leave to correct some of the economic injustice and lack of access and opportunity. So let's make sure that Candace is helping to lead that conversation in DeSoto and Dallas County, and then do that across the country, especially in those states that will be critical in ratifying the ERA so that it becomes part of our Constitution. Yeah.
All right, well, our exit question that we've been asking with so many people running, 20, we've been saying, and counting, we don't know, there could be 40 by next week. And with so much diversity among those who are running, women, people of color, why should women of color choose you?
So, it's...
We'll wait.
Yeah.
We'll wait.
Take your time.
I will. You know, not something that I'm owed, not something that I expect, something that I fully hope to earn by the work that I do on the campaign trail, by showing up and listening to the people that I want to serve. Was just talking to Sheila Jackson Lee backstage. Extraordinary leader and mentor to me
when I was a member of Congress. We talked about reparations and her House Bill 40 that is so important to the future of everyone in this country, to ensure that we know our history, our true story, so that we stop visiting injustices on future generations and begin the work of repair. I remember meeting with Council Member Amanda Edwards, again here in Houston, Texas, on access to capital for communities that have been excluded from capital from the very foundation of this country. Talking to Alyssa Simmons, who heads up the NAACP in Arlington, Texas. This state is at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for women of color. She explained to me that in a community like Arlington that does not have a mass transit system, even if you're covered, try getting to a clinic or a hospital. And then someone else interjected, even if you get to that clinic or hospital, there is disparate treatment for women of color in this country that also helps to explain a disparity in infant mortality that is greater now between white America and black America in 2019 than it was in 1850, 15 years before the abolition of slavery. So showing up, listening, incorporating what I hear, everyone's experiences into this campaign, into our service, is how I hope to earn the support and the vote of the people of this country. So,
and there you have it, Congressman Beto O'Rourke.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us to She the People. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're going this way. Wait. Oh. You went the other way.
Cue music.
All right.
I'd like to welcome to the stage Senator Bernie Sanders.
He has a cute band.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please have a seat. A warm welcome for the senator.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you.
We are so happy to have you. To kick things off with our time with you, 1 of 3 women have been victims of some form of physical violence by an intimate partner within their lifetime. That's all of us in this room and across the country. 1 in 5 women have been raped. And further, each year, thousands of women and girls, particularly black women and girls, indigenous and transgender, are kidnapped, trafficked, or murdered. What is your plan, and what would your plan be as president to end gender-based violence?
Well, for a start, we have got to recognize the severity of the program, of the problem, and make sure that this does not continue to exist. All right? And that means, by the way, not only specific plans and programs, it means a fundamental change in the culture of this country. All right? And that means that every woman in a job feels safe in the workplace, feels safe on campus, that anybody who rapes or harasses understand there will be a severe penalty to be paid for that.
We just had the candidate that came on before you talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. Do you believe that I mean, I think it's about 2 states away from being ratified. Do you believe that, 1 state away from being ratified. Do you believe this country needs a constitutional amendment enshrining the rights of women?
I do. And I think, look, we have had as a nation, as everybody knows, a troubled history in terms of racism, in terms of sexism, in terms of homophobia, and many other injustices. And I think it is absolutely appropriate to say in the Constitution of the United States that women will be equal to men, end of discussion.
And one quick follow-up, we have some questions to bring out. Can you name a policy of yours, what you would champion as president, that would specifically help women of color?
The answer is absolutely. I mean, and it's not just, Joy, not just one policy. It's a number of policies. It is to say that in the year 2019, the time is very long overdue to end institutional racism in all of its forms all over this country. And what does that mean? It means to say that we will not accept discrimination in the workforce. It means that we will end the absurdity of women in general making 80 cents on the dollar compared to men, and minority women making a whole lot less than that. It means we're going to open the doors of educational opportunity for all people, regardless of income. And one of the issues that I have been very proud of, and 4 years ago, as you will well know, these were not widely popular issues. But you talk about equal opportunity, I said then and I say now, that every person in this country, regardless of color, regardless of income, has the right to get a higher education, because we're going to make public colleges and universities tuition free, and we are going to very substantially end the burden of outrageous levels of student debt in this country.
We all witnessed the Kavanaugh hearings and ultimately Kavanaugh having a place of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is stacked against women of color, I would say. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has been filling federal judgeships with right-wing, anti-woman of color people. What could you do as president to overcome those obstacles that are being put in place right now for after taking office in 2021?
Well, the first thing is that my pledge to you, and I don't make a whole lot of campaign promises, but that is, as President of the United States, I will appoint Supreme Court justices and nominate justices all across the board who will represent the needs of people of color, of working people, and who are prepared to believe and fight for justice, not just the people on top. So that's number one. Number two, I know there's been a lot of discussion about packing the court and so forth. I'm not for that, because I think the next party that comes to power will do the same thing. But I think what we can do is something fairly novel, is that after a member of the Supreme Court serves for a certain period of time, perhaps 12 years or so, that justice then rotates to an appeals court. That'll give you some fresh blood.
And we know that, this primary has a lot of people in it, but if you look at where you stand right now in the polls, you are in the first, second, or third in most of the polls. You're polling very well in every state. But in order to consolidate the nomination, you have to win over Hillary Clinton voters.
Yeah.
What are you doing to try to win over those voters, which includes a substantial share of the women of color, of the black women who voted in 2016?
All right, let me make good question, and let me answer it. Let me answer it in a couple of ways. First of all, obviously, we are working really hard to win the Democratic nomination, and if I do that, we're going to work really hard to defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. And to your point, the Democratic Party has got to be united, all right? I hope to win the nomination, and I hope to have my fellow candidates, people who are seeking the nomination, many of whom are personal friends, support me if I win. But my pledge to you is, if I do not win, I will do everything that I can to make sure that that Democratic candidate becomes the next president of the United States. This is no time for petty divisiveness. This is a time to stand together in the fight not only to defeat Trump and his racism and his sexism and his homophobia. This is a time for the American people to come together in the fight for economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. And that is what this campaign is about.
Yeah. And for black women specifically?
I'm sorry?
For black women specifically?
The black women will be an integral part of what our campaign and what our administration is about.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay? And that means...
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yeah. Were you finished with your? Because
Yeah.
I want.
Yeah,
okay.
go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to bring on our audience
Oh, yeah,
question.
Yeah.
Please come to the stage.
Thank you for being here, Senator Sanders.
Thank you.
My name is Sayu Gojwani, and I'm the president of New American Leaders, which works to help immigrants ready to lead. And as a woman of color myself, I have dedicated 3 decades to ensuring that people like me feel like we belong and are full citizens of this country. Just last week, the son of a Louisiana sheriff was arrested for allegedly burning down 3 historically black churches in that state. Unfortunately, this is just one of a consistent string of terrorist attacks committed by white men to enact fear on people of color in the United States. What do you believe is the federal government's role to fight against the rise of white nationalism and white terrorist acts, and how do you plan to lead on that in your first year as president?
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, but we have got to make it very clear that the type of demagoguery we are seeing from the Trump administration is not what this country is about. And I will do everything that I can to help lead this country in a direction that ends all forms of discrimination, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, and discrimination based on people's sexual orientation. I am the son of an immigrant, the proud son of an immigrant, and I will do everything that I can to make sure that we pass, finally in this country, comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship, that we provide immediate legal protection to the 1.8 million young people eligible for the DACA program. So the goal that we have got to establish is to bring our people together around an agenda that speaks to all people. And that means guaranteeing health care to every man, woman, and child as a right, not a privilege. And I'm proud to have led the effort to fight for a Medicare for all single-payer program. It means understanding that when we talk about minority communities, when we raise that federal minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour, you're going to do away with a lot of economic stress in this country. So those are some of the things that I think we've got to do.
Let me just follow up, Senator. The core of the question is about, as president, what would you do with the rise of white supremacist violence to protect our communities?
Absolutely. You know, as somebody who, I know I date myself a little bit here, but I actually was at the March on Washington with Dr. King back in 1963. And as somebody who actively supported Jesse Jackson's campaign as one of the few white elected officials to do so in '88, I have dedicated my life to the fight against racism and sexism and discrimination of all forms. And as President of the United States, at the very top of our agenda will be the understanding that discrimination of all forms has got to end, period. And you do that using the bully pulpit, and you use that doing legislation. If somebody wants to go around perpetrating hate crimes, that person will pay a very, very heavy price indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what the questioner is getting at is a phenomenon that is actually global. We're seeing it throughout Western Europe as well, as influxes of immigrants from the Middle East come in. You're seeing the same kinds of rises of white nationalism.
Well, let me just say a word on that. That's correct.
Yeah, so as president, what would you do to return the U.S. to global leadership on that issue?
Well, you reverse exactly what Trump is doing. Trump is a cowardly, authoritarian president who is trying, he hides the reality that he has tried to throw 30+ million people off health care, give huge tax breaks to billionaires, cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, and education. You can't win an election doing that. So what do? You do what demagogues in Europe and in this country have always done. You scapegoat. You go after immigrants. You go after people of color. You go after minorities. You say those people are the problem. It's not Wall Street. It's not the drug companies. It's not the insurance companies. It is undocumented immigrants. That is demagoguery. You're right. It exists in this country. It exists all over the world. And as President of the United States, our foreign policy will not be, as the current one is, to support authoritarian bigots all over the country. It will be a policy of supporting democracy and human rights.
The women in this room represent 28 states, mostly South and Southwest. In many of these states, women of color, the majority of women, and we're the strongest Democratic vote in the South and Southwest, which is the reason for this forum. In your first 100 days, what would you do as president to indicate and support and center the leadership of women of color, particularly from the states represented in this room?
Well, the first thing I do, and here's my second campaign promise to you, is my administration will look like America. All right? It will be representatives of the people of America. It will be representatives from people who understand the pain and the struggle that working people and minorities are currently feeling. It will not be an administration of wealthy bankers and Wall Street executives, but it will be an administration reflecting all of our people who are prepared to stand up for economic, social, and racial justice.
The question that we've been asking each of our candidates who've come out today is that we know that there is a very diverse, very large field running for the Democratic nomination. It includes many diverse candidates, women, people of color. With all of those options on the table, why should women of color, black women, choose you?
I think what I would ask of people is a couple of things. Look at my record and look at what I have campaigned on. 4 years ago, it was not a popular idea to suggest that health care for all was a right, not a privilege. Today, that concept is seeping through all over this country. 4 years ago, it was not a popular idea to say that we have got to take on a broken, criminal, racist, criminal justice system and bring about real reform which ends the absurdity of the United States having more people in jail than any other country on earth. 4 years ago, I said that we have got to end the war on drugs and legalize marijuana. We have come a long way in 4 years. 4 years ago, when people were kind of laughing at me when they asked me, what is the major national security crisis facing America? I said it was climate change, and that we have a moral imperative to transform our energy system. The bottom line is that many of the ideas that I brought forth 4 years ago are now widely accepted by the American people, and Democratic candidates from school board to President of the United States are now supporting them. And when we talk about justice, we are also talking about the massive levels of racial disparities that exist in this country. It's not just that we need health care for all people. We need to address the fact that infant mortality in the African American community is 2.5 times what it is in the white community. That white families have 10 times the wealth of black families. That in the criminal justice system, African Americans get arrested far more frequently than whites. So the campaign is about two things. It is suggesting very strongly that we cannot continue a nation when 3 families have more wealth than the bottom half of America, when you have a political system which is corrupt because billionaires are able to buy elections. And then within the midst of all of that income and wealth disparity at a national level, we have racial disparities as well. So our campaign is twofold: taking on the big money interests on Wall Street, the insurance companies, the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, and If you look at what the mantra of our campaign is, it is us, not me. Because I understand that I believe this very strongly, that no president, not the best intentioned, not the most honest, can do it alone. If you want to transform America, you want health care for all, you want real criminal justice reform, you want to deal with climate change, you're going to have to take on together, we're going to have to take on incredibly powerful institutions that have unlimited sums of money. So my campaign is about not just winning the nomination, not just defeating Trump. It is the understanding that we cannot transform this country unless millions of people, black and white and Latino, Asian American, Native American, stand up and take on the very powerful, greedy special interests who dominate the economic and political life of this country.
Ladies, Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well,
how about some music?
Let's get the music going. The walk-on music for, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Great to see you. Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
Thank you.
I didn't get the green memo. I'm a bit
there you go.
off color here.
Green is for God. Senator Warren, you've been busy. I have been. Okay. All right. I want to do something a little bit different. I want to ask the audience question to come out first. Let's start because the women in this room are the real superstars of American politics and democracy. Let's have one come out. Come on. Woohoo!
Oh, your mic. Let's see.
Senator Warren.
Can we get that mic on? Or switch it out?
Two. Good afternoon, Senator Warren.
Good afternoon.
Okay, my name is Monifa, and I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Hello, Monifa.
I'm a senior vice president at Moms Rising, working on maternal health.
Yes.
And I'm a proud member of the Movement for Black Lives.
Yep.
And my question is about maternal health. The United States is one of only 13 countries in the world where the rate of maternal mortality is now worse than it was 25 years ago.
Yes, ma'am.
For Black women, the risk of death from pregnancy-related causes is 3 to 4 times higher than for white women, and Black women are twice as likely to suffer from life-threatening pregnancy complications. What will you do to address this crisis that persists independent of education and income?
Oh, great question, Monifa, and I'm so glad you asked it because it is so important. Let me just start by saying, I think everything that happens in government is ultimately about our values. But boy, nowhere do you see it more than measure the values that a country has by how it treats its mamas and its babies. And the United States, for 25 years, has profoundly failed on this front. We have failed our mamas, we have failed our babies, exactly in the ways you talk about. While countries around the world have had more and more mothers surviving childbirth, here in the United States, we're one of only a handful of countries where it's actually gone down. And there is a specific problem, as you rightly identify, for women of color, who are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. And here's the thing. Even after we do the adjustments for income, for education, this is true across the board. This is true for well-educated African-American women, for wealthy African-American women. And the best studies that I've seen put it down to just one thing: prejudice. That doctors and nurses don't hear African-American women's medical issues the same way that they hear the same things from white women. And we got to change that, and we got to change it fast, because people's lives are at stake. So I got a plan. Okay. And here's the plan. I know there are a lot of people, and probably a lot of people in this audience, who've been working on this issue. There are a lot of good ideas about how we could raise awareness of it and other kinds of things we could do to study it. But I got another approach that I want to use. I want to talk to the hospitals, is where most of these births take place, and I want to talk to them in the language they understand: money. Because here's the deal. Yeah, because here's the deal. Right now, the way that most medical procedures are treated, including those of childbirth, is that hospitals and the doctors who work for them and the nurses who work for them, that hospitals get fee-for-services. So they get something for the delivery room and something for the recovery room and something for all the different parts, right? And they get it no matter what the outcomes are. So we have an innovation that's been going on now in medicine for a while called bundled payments. And the way it works is, say you go to have your knee replaced. The hospital just gets a lump of money, and then the measurement is, did the person get a knee that they can walk on that's pain-free? Well, here's what I'd like to change right now in maternal health, and that is to say the hospitals are just going to get a lump of money. And if they bring down those maternal mortality rates, then they get a bonus. And if they don't, then they're going to have money taken away from them. I want to see the hospitals see it as their responsibility to address this problem head on and to make it a first priority. And the best way to do that is to use money to make it happen, because we got to have change, and we got to have change now. So that's my plan.
Thank you.
Do you have a second question?
Yeah.
We do. All right, let's bring in our next questioner. Come on out.
Hello, Senator Warren. I'm Julian Castro.
Hi, Chrissy.
Hello. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'm
Yes.
Nakai Dene, born for the Winnepesaukee clan. With this administration, we've seen an affront to tribal sovereignty related to land and resource exploitation, attacks on our treaty rights, and violence against women with jurisdictional issues that have given rise to an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. If elected as president, what are your plans to uphold and strengthen tribal sovereignty of this land's First Peoples? And how are you going to make it a priority on your campaign?
Oh, thank you. It's a great question. So if we can, let's start particularly with the violence issue. You know, I'm so glad you're here to ask this question, because it's an issue that we need to raise more awareness around missing and murdered Indigenous women. One of the reasons I strongly supported the 2013 Violence Against Women Act was that it expanded the jurisdiction of our tribal governments to be able to deal with violence against women, including violence committed by non-natives. And this was an important expansion. Let me just say, it is critically important now that we reauthorize, again here in 2019, the Violence Against Women Act, and that we expand protection for Native women. But the issue you raise in the larger context about tribal sovereignty is one of the most significant. It is the reminder that we have a government-to-government relationship with tribes across this nation. And we have made, in the United States, our federal government has made promises and treaty obligations that it has failed to honor. The first thing we need to do is go back through our obligations and figure out how we can best honor those obligations. The second is, when we propose legislation, is to look at it through the lens of tribal government, to see whether or not we're actually respecting the tribal nations that are doing the work. And let me give you an example of that. So I have a bill with Elijah Cummings. Some of you may know Congressman Cummings from Baltimore, a good man. That's right, who has, the bill we have is called the CARE Act. And the CARE Act is modeled on the Ryan White CARE Act. Some of you may remember a time back in the 80s when HIV/AIDS, year by year, the numbers were going up, and the federal government would just nibble around the edges, put a little more money and a little more money, and the crisis just kept accelerating. And finally, a little boy named Ryan White declared that he had AIDS, and Congress said, enough is enough. We're going to put the resources that are needed in to be able to knock this problem back. And today, because that was done, there are people all across this country who either didn't contract HIV/AIDS or who are living with it successfully because government stepped in on the side of the people. Congressman Cummings and I want to do the same thing on the opioid crisis. It is time now. We will lose nearly 200 people today from the opioid crisis. It's like a plane crash, and it will happen again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And if someone who loves you came to you and said, I want help, they would have a less than 1 in 6 chance of getting the help they need. Not because we don't know what to do to help them, but because we don't put the money in, the resources in. We treat it not as a medical problem, but treat it with stigma. Congressman Cummings and I believe it is time to change that. And part of that is to make sure that money goes to the communities that are facing the opioid crisis head on, and particularly carved out in this, that money goes directly to the tribes that are dealing with this problem on the ground. It is a point of respect, it is a point of tribal sovereignty, and it should be a part of every piece of legislation that we consider. Thank you.
Related to the comments about the opioid crisis, many of us, many of our communities suffered for the long-term effects of the war on drugs and criminalizing crack. So when someone in the audience said, what about crack? It's a real thing. There are people who who were criminalized and jailed and other things, and the communities are still suffering. So what would you do as president to redress the harms done by the federal government in the war on drugs against our communities?
And the answer is we need both halves. Look, we have a real problem in the criminal justice system, and it is a race problem. We need to address that head on. We cannot pretend that we have a race-neutral criminal justice system. We don't. Study after study shows that for exactly the same crimes, African Americans are more likely than whites to be arrested, to be arraigned, to be taken to trial, to be wrongfully convicted, and to be given harsher sentences. That is a badly broken system, and we need reform of that system from the very beginning to the very end of it.
Senator, you went to the Mississippi Delta. You took your campaign to a non-traditional space, not a swing state, Mississippi.
I did.
What did you learn in the Mississippi Delta talking with those voters?
Well, I went to the Mississippi Delta for 2 reasons. The first one was to be able to talk about a housing plan that I've put out. You know, we've got a housing problem all across this country. We live in America now where there's plenty of housing available if you want to buy a McMansion. There's just not housing available for middle-class families, for working families, for the working poor, for the poor, and for the homeless. And the only way we're going to change that is not housing vouchers. The way we're going to change it is we're going to put real money in from the federal government to build new housing units. I have a proposal to build over 3 million new housing units here in America, in urban areas, in rural areas, and I wanted to be down in Mississippi to talk about this. But I want to tell you a part of that proposal because it tells you something about how I think we have to think about this problem. My proposal will reduce rents, Moody says, by about 10% across the board by getting more housing and better housing available to people. But the question of home ownership is also tied up in this. You know, across this country, for a long time now, home ownership has been the #1 way that families build wealth, working families do. #1 retirement plan in America, pay off your house and live on your Social Security. It's the one asset people buy that appreciates over time and intergenerationally. So if grandma and grandpa can live in the house until they pass, the next generation gets a boost, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. That's why it should be no surprise to anybody in this room that for decades and decades and decades, the federal government subsidized the purchase of housing for white people. For black people, they discriminated against them. And the method of doing this was known as redlining. So they drew off areas where they said plenty of subsidized mortgage assistance, except in the areas inside redlining. The consequence of that, generation after generation after generation, that's been one of the huge drivers of the black-white wealth gap. Well, we can't be in an America that says, well, you know what? We decided not to do that anymore, so everything's okay now. It's not okay. So look at it this way. Back in 1960, when housing discrimination was still legal, think about that, the black-white homeownership gap, right, between the two was 18 points, right, between blacks and white families. Then along comes the civil rights movement, and by golly, we outlaw housing discrimination, redlining goes away, and I will say this, two very interesting things happen. The black-white wealth gap and the black-white homeownership gap starts to shrink, and everybody starts to buy more homes. So it goes up for everybody does better when everybody does better, right? It's moving up, but the wealth gap is shrinking. This is a good thing. It tells us law matters. And then what happens? Long about the year 2000, right in there, the big banks look over the edge and they say, whoa, look at that community. African-American communities, Latino communities, there's some wealth in there. Let's go sell them the most horrible, cheating, lying mortgages possible. That's what they did. And let's see how much wealth we can drag out of those communities. Now, they started figuring out how to make that work. It was the so-called subprime mortgage crisis. And understand, it didn't start with people trying to buy homes. It started with mortgage companies that went to people who already owned homes and helped take those homes away from them. They then targeted seniors who had built up a lot of equity. And over time, they spread it across the country. This is when, by now, we're in the early 2000s. I'm ringing the bell saying, this is coming. We're going to have a crash. People can't, the debt is unsustainable. Millions of people in this country are going to lose their homes. Millions are going to lose their jobs. Millions are going to lose their savings. But nobody in Washington wanted to hear this. I learned a fact. When your ears are stuffed with money, you can't hear well.
Address this.
Can I just do the last part of this?
Of course.
So all I want to say about the last part of this is the one-two punch from the housing crash means that today in America, black and white homeownership rates are larger than they were back when housing discrimination was legal. So I got a plan. I do. 3 million new housing units, but here's a core part of that plan. It says everybody who lives or lived in a formerly redlined district can get some housing assistance now to be able to buy a home. It's not perfect, but it's a step in the right direction.
I'm going to ask you a slightly different twist on the question we've been asking everyone, because I think that you've answered a lot of that question in your responses. We are at She the People, this wonderful organization that is empowering women and women of color. But when I talk with women of color in my own life, they'll say, wow, that Elizabeth Warren has great plans. She's got specific plans. She's got great ideas. But there's a fear in a lot of people of color and a lot of women of color that say, after the experience of 2016, they don't have the confidence in the electorate of this country to elect a woman president. They want to vote one way, but their fear says that they may need to flee to the safety of a white male candidate. How do you address?
I think that's called side-eye.
I'm just telling you, how do you address people who are not confident? They're not confident the country is willing to elect a woman. How do you address people who may be interested in voting for you, but may be afraid?
So, let me just say this about confidence. You bet. Look, this is the heart of it. It's how are we going to fight? Not just individually, but how are we going to fight together? Are we going to fight because we're afraid? Are we going to show up for people that we didn't actually believe in, but because we were too afraid to do anything else? That's not who we are. That's not how we're going to do this. Here's how I see this. I'll tell you how I see it. We got a room full of people here who weren't given anything. We got a room full of people here who had to fight for what they believe in. We have a room full of people here who had to reach down deep, and no matter how hard it was, no matter how scary it looked, they found what they needed to find, and they brought it up, and they took care of the people they loved. They fought the fights they believe in. That's how they got into these seats today. You know, this is how I see it from where I sit. I was in middle school when it's just my mama and my daddy and me. The boys are gone. My 3 older brothers, they've all gone off to the military. My daddy has a heart attack. Everybody thinks he's going to die. He comes back home. He can't work. My mother has never worked outside the home. We lose our family station wagon. My mother is terrified. I hear her at night. I hear her cry. I learn words like mortgage and foreclosure from my parents late at night while I'm supposed to be asleep. And I do remember the day I walk into their bedroom. I'm just a kid, and I see the dress laid out on the bed. You all know the dress. The one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And my mother's standing there in her slip and her stocking feet, and she's crying, and she's pacing, and she's saying, we will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house. She was 50 years old, and she had never worked outside the home, and she was terrified. I watched her face while she looked at that dress, and she looked at me, and she looked back at that dress, and finally she reached over and she pulled that dress on. She blew her nose, she put on her high heels, she walked to the Sears, and she got a minimum wage job answering the phones. The minimum wage job saved our home, and it saved our family. Now, let me just say about this. That day, my mama taught me 3 lessons. It took me a while to learn them. But the first one was, it doesn't make any difference how scary it looks, how hard it is out there. You reach down, you find what you have to find, you pull it up, and you take care of the people you love. I learned over time that wasn't just what my mama taught me. It's what millions of people across this country have taught their daughters and their sons through the years. You do what has to be done to take care of the people you love. But the third thing I learned eventually about that story is it's a story about government and how no matter how hard you work, the rules that are made by the people in government will still make the big difference in your life. Because when I was a girl, a full-time minimum wage job in America would support a family of 3. It would pay a mortgage, it would cover the utilities, and it would cover food. Today, a minimum wage job in America will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. That is wrong, it is worth fighting for, and it's why we're all going to stay in this.
Senator Elizabeth Warren!
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Oh, no. Look, a standing ovation. A standing ovation.
Thank you. We got to do this. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Senator Elizabeth Warren.
The slide's up.
And can we get a big hand for Amy, please, for putting all of this together?
Joanne Reed, MSNBC.
And you all, thank you all for the amazing questions as well.
You were an amazing and vibrant audience.
This side of the room especially.
You. I appreciate that woman over there. I have some thank yous to make. I want to thank the people who made it possible for us to be here today. Way to Win, Women's Donor Network, Quinn Delaney, Susan Pritzker, thank you so much. And to our partners, and also, this isn't the end. She the People will be going to swing states to empower women of color all the way through November 2020. The She the People Presidential Forum, we already made history. I will see you in Virginia on May 18th, She the People Town Hall. Go to our website, connect with the people in this room, connect and find each other, and follow us at She the People. Now, finally, and don't forget, we have music, food, and drink in the after party right behind you. I'll see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye-bye.